Hello and welcome back to the 8Cube Circus. My name is Smlz. I'll be your host for today. Joining us, we have got our 13-time guest, Denish. Denish, how you doing?
Doing great. I'm very happy with the OTA, but not happy. I missed it. I missed a week, so I can't be a
You
14-time
can't be
guest
you can't be
anymore.
a 14-time guest, but at least you're better than the 12-time guest, xenaid.
Rats.
All right, so today we've got a bit of an interesting episode. First of all, no guests, it's just us three. Second of all, this is a location episode, so we're going to be talking a lot about locations, about sort of board space and how your board can interact with different locations. How do you play a Savage Land game as compared to a Clintar game? But first, we have an important announcement to make. We have a Discord now, so you can find us on Discord for coaching sessions for Marvel Snap. You can also find us on Discord for stream and YouTube alerts for both xenaid and Denish's Twitch stream, for the 8Cube Circus podcast, and for Snap Academy. Link in the description for the Discord. Make sure to join up. And also, make sure to subscribe to Snap Academy on YouTube. We're on the road to 300 subscribers, and we appreciate every single one. So, make sure to join our Discord, and let's get into the episode with the first concept, the OTA. So, not really a location thing, but OTA just came. Some tech got reverted, some tech didn't. I'll start by prefacing Enchantress and Negasonic stayed the same. Killmonger, Shadow King, Red Guardian, Alioth, and Cosmo were fully reverted. And Shang got a bit of an interesting change. I want to start here for a sec, especially because xenaid is known to have a history with this Shang card. Shang is going back to his old stats and keeping his new text box. 4-3 only destroys one 10 power card at his location. In most cases, this is like nothing. It's like the same card. But Sauron is a deck, and Sauron likes to play 10s. xenaid, take it away.
I think it's honestly fine. It'll still do good things against Sauron. And against Sauron, you're playing a 4-13. Yeah, that's pretty good. You just have to make sure that the rest of your deck doesn't suck anymore. I think that's the reason why Shang play rate is going down, because before, Shang would just be like the ultimate bailout. Like Galactus would pop down or something. You pray, you Shang. Hopefully they don't have anything bid. Like Nidavellir comes down, Gamma Lab comes down. So I think if people's perception of Shang that he's a bad card, his play rate will actually become appropriate. And then Second Dinner can play or nerf or buff the card accordingly. I think Shang's always been an overrated card, and that's inflated his stats, because he's winning queues where he's not supposed to, because decks aren't necessarily supposed to be running him. And I think, hopefully, with perception of the card and tech meta dying out, the card will actually be played the amount he's meant to be played, I guess. And we'll see where the Shang change is, because I don't think this is the last Shang change we're going to get.
Alright, I'll jump in here. I think that this Shang change is certainly an interesting one. I'm not quite sure how to feel about it. One, because I thought Shang was one of the most balanced cards in the game beforehand. But I also think this nerfs him very slightly. If you were going to nerf his text box, this is definitely the way to do it, instead of making him hit 11 plus. Shang hitting 11 plus is a much bigger nerf, considering the cards that are 10 power, than having him just hit one card. The only deck I think this really affects is Sauron, but in general, I think the idea of this change was to lower Shang's play rate because it was so high beforehand. Also, they mentioned that they would still be open to more Shang changes. Next up, Denish, Agatha got nerfed. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm in favor of Agatha nerfs. I think that card is silly, but I don't think this is the right way to do it. When you just remove power like this, it is definitely going to actually nerf Agatha. But it's not actually nerfing Agatha from doing the thing that she's doing that's crazy. She's still thinning your deck, and losing 2 power on your high roll doesn't really matter. The only situations where I can see this really applying is in very specific low roll situations where she's actually playing herself, and in Black Knight decks, which of course are important, but I mean, obviously I see the game through Hela lens, it's a little different. In specifically Hela, I think she's fine. I think Hela's unplayable anytime Stardust is playable anyways in Hela. Outside of Hela with Black Knight and like the tech deck, I think this is a pretty big deal because even with Black Knight, like if you're getting an Ebony Blade off of her, that's a 4-power nerf. So yeah, I can see her still being playable, and the change that I would want for Agatha would be to have her not affect the draw, but still start possibly in the left of your hand with more power, even 15.
I think the power nerfs are actually really significant. Like especially for like if you're getting like a turn 3 Hela or turn like when you have the raw player on 5, 14 to 12 is like a huge gap, I think. Because I think usually when you're playing around 3 cards, or even 2, like a 10 plus a 3 in a Sauron deck, like the 12 to the 14 break part is a whole additional card of investment. So I think like it really is impactful in terms of the decks that can compete against it. Because I do think it puts Agatha a lot closer into the Sauron threshold. Like before, I would probably almost auto retreat against an Agatha snap, and now I'm thinking like the games are a lot closer because you'd be pretty close on points in the Sauron matchup, unless they have the Giga high roll. But I'm just scared of like Agatha tech decks are the things that like where if people find a way to make Jug good, make Cosmo, etc. with her, then that's going to be what I'm really scared of.
Absolutely. I don't know if you actually do retreat against Agatha. That sounds like it's a little bit of lying, but that's completely fine. Nothing wrong with lying. Once again, I do think this Agatha chain is a big deal unless you're high rolling, and like even mid rolling, it might not be that big of a deal. But on these low rolls, it's definitely more of the deck, which will make it easier to contest if you're only reviving the Agatha and a Legion, and then you're stuck playing like Corvus Ghost Rider for the last turn, or you're stuck playing like Juggernaut on the last turn. Like I think this nerf impacts the super low roll games for sure.
All right, so just quickly, we're all gonna mention now one change that we think is a little bit underrated. So I know what Zenya's gonna say. I will start. I think the Viv Vision change to 3/3 is a much bigger deal than people are making it out to be. I don't think this card is amazing, but the fact that it's easier to get it rolling makes it quite good. This card's biggest issue is getting the first proc. Because when you get the first proc, it's easier to get the second proc, and it's easier to get the third proc. The first proc was the toughest part of making this card work. It is now easier to get that first proc. I don't think this card is amazing, but I definitely think it's playable. Zen, you want to take it away with your underrated OTA change?
I like playing Viv Vision. I don't know exactly how much easier it is to get the first proc, because it kind of varies depending on the number of 1/2s versus 1/3s in the meta, and 2/2s versus 2/3s in the meta. So, like, if you're looking at the 3/3 text line, it's not competing with 3s very well. But it doesn't really have to, because you'd have to play on the same lane on turn 3. What it is doing, though, is it's helping compete against 1/2s. So Quicksilver decks that aren't playing Domino right on top of them, right? And it's also competing against, like, really Surge is the other one that people have to start being aware of, because it would be a lot easier to lose the Surge lane. But like if you're playing Lizard into Viv Vision, you're usually winning that lane anyway. If you're playing Viv Vision into a Blink lane, you're usually winning it anyway. Now it's like probably you have a higher chance of winning it after she moves. But I think the downside of Viv is always that you can't control where she moves at the start of the turn, and she ends up self-clogging, and she ends up like nerfing herself, because you're usually stacking the Viv lane, which means you're losing the lane that she moves to if you ever lose it once. And then you're not really doing so well with it. I think it's probably good in Sauron. I don't think it's good in Surfer builds still because of the lack of viable 2-drops. And I think like if you play a 2/3 plus a 3/3, it's very easy to compete with that lane afterwards, especially if like Viv becomes meta. So I'm not quite sure how to feel about it.
Yeah, I do think Vivision is neat at 3/3. I don't play her, obviously. I don't even own her. I don't buy the season pass usually. But the way that the place that I see her is either Sauron, where she's buffing the cards up to 10 for a Scar, or like even just having bigger numbers is always nice. And also I can see her in like a Silk package where you don't have to worry about that self-clogging, and also you're scaling like a Stomper and a Batroc and all those things. I could see her in that as well, especially since like with Captain America Shield and Jeff or whatever people are running in those kinds of decks these days, you can kind of unclog yourself if she puts herself in an unfortunate position. And if your opponent decides to try to play for the lane to prevent you from getting the hand buff, then you end up getting the move buff anyways, and it like buffs a Craven or a Hydra Stomper.
All right. So we've talked about Viv Vision. I think the buffing it up to 10 point that Denish made is also similar to Awesome Andy's change. Awesome Andy now being effectively a 2/6, buffs 8 power cards up to 10 power. That's significant with Scar. There's one other piece I really want to touch on this OTA, and it's not Stardust getting nerfed. Denish, you can take Stardust away in a second, but I really want to touch on Mystique first. 3/1. In most decks, I don't think this matters. However, I think this is incredibly interesting and negative, and you might glance it off as a slight -1. Oh, it's just +1 cost and negative. You could use that anyway. No longer gets hit by Jane, Mystique. No longer can you go like Gore plus flipped Mystique on 6. It's not, can't do that anymore. Messes up the consistency with lines. Messes up the Jane draw. Is this a route you're open to them taking to balancing negative? Maybe Mystique to 3/1. Throw in like an Iron Man to 5/1. Do you think that making the Jane less consistent and negative is an appropriate way to balance the deck?
Yeah, I think the Jane interaction's pretty unhealthy anyway, but Dennis, you go ahead.
I love what they did with Mystique, to be honest, because she got the buff in like the normal decks, which I don't think she necessarily needed, but I mean, I'd love to see more Mystique. It's a pretty cool card. It's fun to play around, but it does actually hit negative pretty significantly as well. Like even in your Pixie Scam deck, like that's a good which it, by the way, it's playing a discounted Gore with a Mystique. Like you could still use her in a lot of really good situations, but it's not negative. Or you're probably still going to use it in negative. The interaction that I like more so than the Jane is not being able to play Gore Flip Mystique. I think that is the part that is going to be the most significant.
Sounds like people are just going to lose 8 to negative a little bit more, though, I'm going to be honest. Like maybe it's a buff because people will cope stay more against negative. You'll probably see their deck going down, like, instead of 3 cards left, maybe 2 cards left. You'll know, like, one of them is Mystique, and you can feel a lot better about your negative stays. Reading one additional card off their Jane draw is actually really important, because you can, like, kind of guess their range a lot better if they only have 3 or 4 cards. Like, usually you would need 2 tech cards, like Echo, Negasonic, or Negasonic Jug, etc., to deal with them. But now, 1 tech card might be reasonable, if they don't get to not draw as much.
Alright, so you've heard enough about the OTA, you can go hear about it. Other places, it's time for the start of the location episode. We're going to start it off with hand management. So there's 2 main decks, I believe, that are the most difficult exercises in hand management in Snap. Merlin decks and V-hand decks. And V-hand I've used Moon Girl to personify it, because I think those are like the true most difficult hand management deck in the game. I'll start for a bit because I played a lot of V-hand. I think V-hand's hand management is difficult, particularly Moon Girl decks, because from turn 1, you need to be thinking about your Moon Girl. What if I draw it? What happens then? You need to be maximizing your Moon Girl because it's your most powerful V-hand generator. You need to really be having the game plan for the game alongside your Moon Girl V plan, your Moon Girl plan. You effectively have to travel two trains of thought at once when you're playing a Moon Girl V hand deck. The first thought is, what if I don't draw V hand? Here's what I'm gonna play. This gets me X amount of points. Now here's if I don't draw Moon Girl. Here's if I do draw Moon Girl. These are the points that I need. I need to keep these cards in my hand. You might have to like forego a V hand on 2, Frigga on 3, if it means that you can Moon Girl your V hand, and that is actually better than the V hand Frigga line because they don't know you have V hand. So it's got a lot higher cube equity. They might suspect you have V hand, but the odds of like staying in a game say that you don't have V hand if it's on a double. It also gives you a lot more snap equity. You can snap before the Moon Girl even comes down to sort of get them in before they really know what's going on. You could all of a sudden be losing and then duplicate a V hand like a Captain Carter and a Captain America, and you have Quinjet on another cost reducer, and all of a sudden your whole hand costs 1 and you can just vomit out 50 points on turn 6 and flip the game. I think Moon Girl decks are very hard to play. They take some time to learn, so don't feel like scared if you're not doing so great with them at first. But if you put the time in and you learn it, you'll do very well with it. But it is a difficult deck in terms of you need to be managing multiple game plans at once.
Yeah, anyway, this rat Smlz just took my whole intro section. The reason we're going over hand management as well as 2 other core concepts is to talk about how to evaluate the game on a case-to-case basis. Like, a lot of Snap players will teach you about how to play specific lines of a deck, like this Smlz, the one-trick rat, who plays like V-hand lines and Ultron lines. But like, if you're a true one-trick like me and Denish, there's like a lot of assessing game states that you have to do. Hand management is one of them. So there's obviously the V-hand lines where you have to manage your hand, but hand management is so much more than that, right? Based on the locations that show up, like which cards in your hands are viable in certain locations. So it's really resource management kind of thing. Like, is there a location that gives you Sentinels? Are the Sentinels going to be valid for your game plan in this game? The location that gives you Jins, like, is it worth playing in there? Is it worth playing into Lechugia or the mines? So to give your draws random draws, you know? Like, these are things that you should be thinking about also in terms of hand management, because it's not just the cards that you have in your hand or the size of your hand, it's the cards that you can potentially draw into as well, right? Like, for example, if there's Sanctum Sanctorum in a game and your deck doesn't have anything, Iron Patriot's value becomes way, way higher, right? Like, you want to draw random outs, and there's a lot of things to talk about when you're looking at the different resources in your hand, like Merlin spells, etc. But yeah, I mean, counting is a good start, right? Counting the number of cards you have in your hand for Moon Girl is specifically a V-hand one-trick thing that Smlz would focus on. But Denish has hand management tips too, and he's a hella player.
Yeah, I've got a completely different style of hand management with discard and Hella. It's less so what's in the hand and how much space you have, and more so where it is in the hand. You can't really necessarily change it, but it lets you come up with lines down the road that will basically you're gonna be able to tell what you're gonna do later based on where the cards are in your hand now, because you've got like a blade that discards right, a redshift that discards left. These position things are very important, like later in the game. So if you're gonna play a blade Ghost Rider, you're able to say, well, I can either draw into Ghost Rider, Jubilee, or Infinite. I'm gonna either blade one of those cards because it's on the right. I need to make sure the right side of my hand is basically clear, because if I draw that Ghost Rider, I need to get to my Giganto, which is slightly further to the left. That's a little bit complicated to explain without a visual, but overall, what I'm saying is, while hand management, it's different in every deck. It's not always, we can't go over everything with hand management, but like once you start playing a deck more, keeping in mind the ways that the deck manipulates your hand or needs to observe your hand earlier in the game to control playlines later is something to think about when you're trying to improve and get a better understanding of the deck.
Yeah, I'll even give a shout out to the best 2-drops in the game right now, because I think 2-3s are like very good, considering the rest of the 2-drops suck. And a lot of the 2-3s are hand management, hand gen cards. So I'll shout out Iron Patriot, I'll shout out Mirage, I'll shout out Kate Bishop, and I'll shout out Merlin. All these 2-3s are kind of ubiquitous 2-3s that you can just play in your deck. They all have generally positive effects, as long as you can kind of compete for the IP lane. Mirage, I think, is criminally underrated. All these cards help you get priority early, and they have different uses, right? So if you're the kind of player that likes interacting with locations, interacting with your opponent more, K Bishop's a great card. If you like a variety of plays and you're good with flexibility, Merlin's a very good card. If you like just bullying your people out of games, like I do, Iron Patriots, a really good card for that. And if you like information, then Mirage is a great card, right? And all these are 2-3s that help you generate cards and have a wide variety of use cases.
Yeah, I also think when you're running multiple of these 2-cost cards, it's pretty important to decide which one you play when. And so Zen just ran down the use cases for most of them between information or bullying. A lot of the time you'll get put in a situation where it's like, okay, I'm screwed unless I get some bullshit off my card generators. And being able to recognize that is also a little bit of hand management, where you need to be able to say, all right, I'm not beating negative unless I get some real bullshit off of, I don't know, Iron Patriot, or maybe it is negative, so you know, oh, I need to play Martyr later. Being able to recognize those things does apply, not necessarily entirely to hand management, but I think it's important to mention here.
Yeah, and I think moving on from hand management, the next case scenario is probably board management. Hand management applies the least to my deck. It applies the most to like Smlz's deck, and then Denish's position-wise, but Sauron doesn't have as much hand management other than drawing your outs. I think board management is very important for decks that rely on power input, because most decks have like cheap, low-power cards. You think of Hood, you think of like Mirage, you think of Mercury, like these lower power cards that kind of just take up space in a lane but help your future game plan. And they take up board space, right? Like I think V-Hand's the most kind of board space reliant deck, where you have to like play your generators but also play cards with power, and if you don't get a even mix of both, go tall enough in a lane to win. There's also like where you put your cards in terms of what each lane is for. So like there's generation lanes, there's lanes you want to swing, there's like the right lane in case of you're playing against an Nihilist, right? There's your Merlin lane that, you know, you're pretty allergic to playing spells in, because you usually want another lane, usually with a weaker card that's not 3 power, but if 3 power is your weakest card, like Sauron is in my deck, you usually don't want to play that card the same in your lane. And there's also just like a bunch of restrictive locations that affect your lane management. But for board space, I think it's a pretty brief intro that we just talked about for board management, right?
Yeah, so I have been trying to learn how to play Move lately. And yes, it's because the deck is broken. And yes, it's because, yeah, I don't like it either. But I figured if I learn it, it's easier for me to beat it. Because I don't want to take this to a tournament because I hate playing the deck because it's honestly kind of boring to me. So, Move cares a lot about board management. I care a lot about hand management more. I find hand management decks to be a lot more fun for me. Board management is kind of where I get a little bit frustrated with this game, just because how it's weird. Because board management, I believe, is affected even more by locations than hand management, so it's much more variable. So you've got to think on your feet a lot more when it comes to board management. I have 2 examples here. First of all is Mysterio. Mysterio, I think, is probably one of the hardest board management cards in the game, just because you need to... I see xenaid disagreeing, so I'm going to back up why I believe this. I think that clogging yourself at 2 locations effectively to get, say, extra 3 Hitmonkey procs, -3 on your Sasquatch next turn, -3 on your Mockingbird next turn. That's all very powerful. But you need to supplement those payoffs to be able to, like, win the game. So you need to develop a strong enough board state on turns 1 to 4 without clogging yourself to be able to, like, effectively play this guy on 5. there's a lot of considerations in deck building with Mysterio. When it comes to this stuff, I think that there's a lot of considerations every board space. I know a lot of Mysterio decks run Elsa. It's a lot harder to get an Elsa lane going with Mysterio because you don't want to clog your Elsa lane. It is a bit tricky to get the hang of. I mean, obviously it's not the most difficult thing in the world, but I do think that Mysterio, in contrast to the Sauron and Hela big cards gamer archetype things, I think it's a very important board space management card. Werewolf is kind of doing double duty here. One, Werewolf itself is a pretty important board management card. You can't leave a werewolf alone in a lane like where he's like the fourth card, because then you can't get him back to that lane. And that's very important information that your opponent can use so that maybe they don't contest that lane. Because one of the biggest upsides at Werewolf is that you don't know what lane he's contesting on 6. They have 15 power, they can put it wherever they want. Another thing that's important with Werewolf when it comes to board management is that he enables you to run Merlin, who is the single best board management card in the game. He can take away cards, he can morph into more cards, he can change up locations that are really not making your board management that good. Merlin's spells are only so powerful in a vacuum. What Merlin does to your board management is why he's so good. So I think board management, there's two ways to look at it. There's the way to look at it with like a werewolf, where yes, you need to manage where the werewolf is, but you're also running cards that can help werewolf and help your board management. And then there's the Mysterio, which you need to be thinking about board management from turn 1 with that deck.
I think the Mysterio argument's like grossly over. But I think when we talk about one argument that Braun players, I know they don't think about, but it's this concept of nullifying your opponent's plays. And I think the conversation has come up in the last few podcasts a little bit more about like why certain breakpoints matter. So like, for example, we talk about Agatha being 14 to 12. We talk about Stardust being 7 or 6, right? Like these breakpoints matter because they affect the number of cards it takes to swing a lane. And it also matters like if your opponent can potentially output. So a quick example is if you imagine that I'm playing Iron Patriot on my Sauron, right? That's a 6 power lane that all of a sudden I'm not able to contest very much further if I wasn't a Sauron deck, right? Like with the Sauron deck, I have that 6 power lane with 2 cards in it. And I can go up to around 28 power because I can play a 10 and a 12. But I think a lot of people don't really think about that. And there's like specific number breakpoints. Another example of this is I was playing against Hella Enjoyer, the Tribunal player in our one-trick tournament. And you can very reasonably calculate like how much potential power you have in a lane to kind of match that output, right? Like, you know, V-Hand, if they have 2 demons in a lane, that's usually around 16 plus a card generator is like 3. So like they can output reasonably like 19 to 25 in a lane, depending on their card investment. And so you can use these interactions with your opponent's potential card output to decide where you should place your cards. And I think that's a like conversation that a lot of players have is like, where do I play my cards on turn 6? Well, it is a board management issue because it's like, what is the potential power output and how likely are they to kind of make these plays, make these reads, right? And I think talking about turn 6 board management and output, denish probably has a lot to say for Hella.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to touch a little bit on the other side of board management, which I'll touch on Clog as well as Hella. We'll do like the Clog stuff first. So Clog is really strong and prevalent a lot of the time, when it is at least, because it's restricting board space, which is messing up people's board management. This is a concept that people kind of know, but they don't think about, where you are with a lot of the time when there's a really strong card, it's because it can move. So that's like Prime Nocturne, Prime Jeff. These are cards that unclog you. And so it's forcing people that basically don't need to play around board management as much, more so they can do whatever the hell they want, and so the opponent can't read them playing around it. I'll let xenaid, I don't know what he means here. Xenaid, touch on Goblin Titania.
Yeah, I think like when you talk about where people consensus, don't be too predictable. Usually when cards per lane, that's when they start thinking about their management. But you can actually be intentional if you know your maximum power output by playing like 3 cards in a lane if you know that you can always swing with the 4th card, right? Playing specifically against Clog, 2 becomes that benchmark where they can guarantee Clog you with Goblin Debris, with Titania Goblin, with Viper plus card Titania, right? So past turn 4, you really want to be focusing on that. But I think it's good practice to kind of predict your general power output before you even get 2 cards in a lane, right? It's like, if I have my Sauron in this lane, should I also play my Iron Patriot in this lane? Or can I risk like going in this empty lane with IP and still winning it anyway? Because you know that playing Sauron plus IP in a lane will put you at a significant downside in terms of potential power output, right? Like, I think people's red flags automatically go up when there's 3 cards in a lane, but that just makes you so easy to read against like move players, clog players, like sneaking random debris, sneaking random Titanias. And I think people should be more intentional about where they're, because I think most players go 2 card, 2 card, 2 card into turn 4, 5, 6 like play, and it's really easy to kind of take advantage of that if you're kind of understanding.
Yeah, okay. And brief, I do agree with you with the 2 card limit being able to prevent yourself from getting clogged, especially by a clog player. But another thing with board management would be I find people are really, really against filling lanes early, which filling lanes early is bad, but it's not actually the end of the world because what you're doing is you're forcing your opponent to commit most of their power into a lane just to win one lane. And so if you know you can swing the other 2, or you're pretty sure you can swing the other 2 pretty reasonably, filling a lane isn't the end of the world. Obvious, like you should still be very careful about when you do it, but especially if you're running a card like Blink or running really big dudes in your deck like a Scar. Like if you cap out a lane, you're probably gonna win the lane, assuming you cap it out with something big. And so, while it is an important concept to not clog yourself, it's also something to consider that even if you do, there's a chance you just win the lane anyways because you're massive. One more time briefly before we move on to information control. I'm gonna touch on Hela, which it applies to Hela as well as other bigger combo decks such as Nimrod and Khonshu and all these other decks with really, really big last turn plays where you can usually control where your power goes on the last turn, but it's not always necessarily guaranteed. With Hela, it's because it's random, but a lot of the time you have to worry about like Juggernaut or Scream moving your shit around or Negasonic removing some power from some lane. Being able to build up your general board structure so that you don't get knocked around by a Negasonic is also really important. Or like knocked up by a Juggernaut, because if you're able to fill one lane and then win another, if they jug all your cards from one lane and it's guaranteed to go into the other one, you're still playing a ridiculous amount of power, but the Juggernaut isn't forcing you into a really unfortunate 50-50 situation where now all your power is in one place. Another card that does that is like a Cannonball, where if you are pretty sure your opponent's running Cannonball and they don't play a Mercury by like 4, you have to play around and build your board up around the fact that they could Cannonball you, and you need to make sure it's not going to get hit into your other big lane. And regarding Hela specifically, just to touch on it briefly, what you want to do is have it so that Hela is winning her own lane, which can be a little tricky sometimes. But we have these really big cards like 1/3 Blade, which doesn't sound big, but it's a 1/3, so it's fine. Or like Ghost Rider reviving an Agatha, which is basically, well, now it's a 4/17, which is good enough. Or Jubilee pulling, I don't know, Corvus, like it's a 4/6, but you're using these cards to build up your general board structure so that you don't have to deal with the Hela Revival RNG. I think that concept does also apply to Juggernaut, and I want to know if you guys have anything else to say about this last turn board management before we move on.
I think it's just playing around like Jug and Negasonic, basically. Those are the 2 you're probably going to see and end up seeing the most. You need to also use some priority dynamics on your board management last turn. Try to win some lanes that maybe you have, like, you're really suspecting an Eliath or really suspecting a Shang, and you need to build your board management around those tech cards to take prio, to lose prio, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think also like we'll go more in depth. There's a lot of like different niche mechanics. If you're like interested in board management or hand management is your passion, like find us in the Discord. Another shout out to that one. It'll be linked on our socials. But we talk about like Luna Snow, right? There's a lot of cards that we all enjoy playing, and a lot of decks that interact very well with board management and hand management. I don't know if you watched like any of our Golden Gauntlet games. I think I'm the only one who streams them, but I talk about a lot of these concepts as well in that, right? And then moving on to the last concept is information control. I think it's like one of the more basic concepts because we've talked about information asymmetry a lot in this game. So there's cards that provide inherent value, right? I think Old White Queen used to be broken because you could like tell what 6-drops your opponent had when she was overstatted. Iron Patriot's like the ultimate information asymmetry card. Unless your opponent runs Mobius, then they don't really care. We talk about information, like hiding what deck you're playing is also pretty important, in my opinion, unless you're a one-trick. So I don't know. Let me know what you guys think.
I think there's two types of information control. I'm the one who made this slide, so these are the two types that I believe there are. One, there's hidden info power cards like Iron Patriot that are hiding power. Two, it's reactive tech cards, so cards that are hiding interaction. Cards like Shadow King, Shang-Chi, and Enchantress, if you put the card into your deck, it might be a little bit of a surprise. Like, oh, they've got an Enchantress in there. Less so that one, but more so like a, I don't know, I still put it there because you can still surprise people with it. But it's what, oh, they're running a Shadow King. I mean, I was playing against Guapo playing Bounce, and he ran a Shadow King against me playing Surfer. It was very unexpected. You can just shove these random cards into these decks. Enchantress is probably, I think, going to see more with stuff like Luna Snow and Ramp becoming a little bit more apparent, I think. But just shoving this random tech card into your deck, you justified it, but it's still random. Random Shang-Chi, random Enchantress, random Shadow King, random Mercury. Just shoving these cards into the decks gives you so much snap equity when you have that matchup. As for the hidden power cards, we've already talked about them a lot here on the channel. They're some of my favorite cards in the game. Cards like Iron Patriot, Copycat, Kang, Hulkling. All these cards that make so you know the power and they don't. Very, very impactful.
Yeah, well said. I do think another form of information control to consider is almost at the control of the player. So this is when you make play lines that are a little bit harder to read. Not necessarily things like, oh, they jugged, what a surprise, it was in this lane instead of that lane. More so like in Hela's example, when you blade a card, they can't see what card it is. And so on turn 6, you can just blade something before you Hela, and then there's just way more power than they thought there was. A lot of decks have really small situational things like that they can do. V-Hand is another one, where with the Moon Girl, although this is a little bit more into the IP element of it, but it also kind of isn't, where sometimes it's good to hold the second V or the first V-Hand or the second both V-Hands until late, just because the opponent doesn't know if you have it or not. And so being able to change your play lines to hide important information to potentially bait worse stays is where I think that information control is the most significant.
Yeah, I mean, your whole deck basically relies on information. They don't know what you're... Essentially, you know what you're going to do. You know your odds, but sometimes it's... Oh, man, you got a lucky gambit. 80% chance of winning that game, and you're pretty much like locked in, right? Based on your different play lines, like you're reviving a blink. No one else is thinking about it other than the people who've like played Hela, right? Cool interaction with the V-Hand line that's not power based is when you're against a Magic deck that's heavily reliant on Magic, you can focus your Moon Girl onto a Nico that increases your chance of getting a location change spell. And like people will be like, oh, you randomly got Nico on turn 6. But if you're playing for that out, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, now like I was shooting for that Nico and you got punished because of it, right? There's other things like I will play Sauron on turn 1 if Red Skull is in my hand against known Cerebro players, and like they don't know that I'm thinking about that, but that's something I'm constantly thinking. And I'd be in like Husky with that as well. He's like, oh shoot, he played Sauron and Nightmare. There's no way he has a Red Skull that's activated. But if you know like your win conditions and you know how to beat people in that information, and other things like Merlin, right? You want to hold your spells Except for like for me, when I'm playing Merlin, if I have the location spell, I'll make sure I'm playing one spell a turn to kind of trick my opponent because they'll think like, oh, he's playing out these spells, he doesn't have it. But if they miscount it or something, then it'll trick them into like staying into your Merlin, obviously changing the magic lane or something like that.
Yeah, so I think information control is definitely a big part of Snap, whether it be Merlin changing the locations, Hella doing her thing where you're reviving blanks and you're thinking about that. Anything else you guys want to add on information control before we go into talking about specific locations?
I think we're good to transition. Zen, do you want to do the transition?
Cool. So when we move on to talking about locations, there's a lot of different interactions, right? Locations are what make the game of Marvel Snap unique. From every game flipping over 3 different locations. The first thing we'll kind of intro is the cards that kind of help you with locations. A lot of people forgo running these cards, but I feel like at High Infinite, like having a lot of control, a lot of skill expression is running these cards and using them properly. The most meta ones you'll see are Merlin. I think he's just the best like flexibility card for all case scenarios. Denish and I are real enjoyers of Legion. Smlz just jumping on the train for that. We know Gamer, longtime listener, is a huge Scarlet Witch fan. If you're a little bit on the low curve side, but you want some more access, Scarlet Witch. And then Nico is just like the best one cars in the game. And you have to remember that she has a location change, right? There's a lot more niche location change cards that Denish will kind of go into why they get a little bit more niche play. But you'll see Storm, you'll see Snowguard, Nocturne, Quake, and Magic. These are also location change cards, but not for the general purposes that the 4 aforementioned ones were, right?
Absolutely. I'll touch briefly on the niche ones, but real quick before we move to the niche ones, I do think, yeah, Merlin. So what's interesting about Merlin is right now I do think it's the best location control card, but also it kind of fits in a lot of stuff. And so we actually have a meta right now where there's a lot of location control just out there, which impacts, of course, Magic, which I think it's fascinating because I've seen a lot of Magic, and this is not a great time to play Magic. I don't know why there's so much. But I think it's probably because Hell Enjoyers come back to the game. All these Tribunal players. What do you think, Smlz? But
I think
real
Tribunal
quick.
players are great. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't see an issue with them. They're playing. Hey, they're playing a very interactable combo deck. So you dies to pretty much anything. It's not like there's a silver bullet to it, like certain 4/6 I know of. But I mean,
All right.
I don't know. Tribunal's
We don't need
based.
to talk about
Tribunal's
that.
based in Hellas cringe. I said it.
All right. Yeah, but with you, yeah, Tribunal dies to all the location changers, but they run Magic, so it kind of is their own location changer. With Magic and a little bit Storm, people obviously the first thought would be, oh, it's giving me this location. But what people don't think about is you can also use it to take things away. So like Cerebro 2 running Magic is really nice because and also Storm. Because you can, well, first of all, you can rug pull your Magic, but I don't think they run both anymore. They just run one of the two. But if you have
A few do, a few
location
rats
that's like,
do.
yeah, some really smart individuals run both. I think you should run both. That's awesome. Run Nico too. But yeah, so you're able to turn off at disadvantageous locations for you. To touch on Snowguard a little, I think it has potential in these hand gen decks, but Snowguard interacts with locations in a completely different way than everyone else because the hawk and the bear don't actually change them, and so at the end of the game you still have to deal with the downsides of the locations. It's more so just temporary, like, oh, there's squirrels everywhere, or oh, there's another monster at the location and they failed, where you also have to give up the fact that you're running it, which is pretty bad because they see the snow guard. Talking about Nocturne has a similar issue to Snowguard, where you are saying, okay, I'm doing location control stuff this game, get ready for it. So you lose a lot of that cube rate or that instant win potential with the surprise factor of your Legion or a little bit of your Merlin. Merlin in the sense of people cope on, oh, they don't have a location spell, even though they always do. But yeah, and then Quake also has the problem of Snowguard a little bit. That's another location card where it isn't actually changing the locations. So at the end of the game, you still have your problems. but you can still do some pretty nice things with Quake. You can move like Mojo World, or you can move a Luke's Bar, and people are just not ready for that. And so you can actually get cube rate out of Quake. And then yeah, Magic has the problem of dying to all the other ones. Anything else we want to say about the cards that help with locations?
So I would just say, like, if your deck, I would recommend Merlin you in for any two, and I think it just improves your gameplay. With like, I think a lot of the game knowledge that both Denish and I have from locations is literally just from slamming Legion onto them, right? So there's a lot of interactions, and like a lot of things you can do, and it gives you a lot of outs for a lot of games that you may have necessarily like already lost it. So I would like recommend, if you're not just net decking, to like slam one location card, pick your favorite one, play Snowguard, play Quake, play Magic. It'll make your games more interesting, that's for sure.
I want to touch on Snowguard specifically because all the other location changers in this game see play. And Snowguard's like the only one that doesn't. Like, people play Quake, people play Legion, Merlin's very popular. People play Magic, people play Storm, people play Nico, Scarlet Witch. All those cards get played, but not Snowguard. And I think the reason why is because location change itself has cube equity. You can snap on a location change, whether it be changing a limbo, whether it be changing something extremely important to the opponent. Location change matters a lot. Maybe you can change, as Cerebro, you can change a Xandar, but they don't know that you have it when you are location changing something. Snowguard lets them know you have it. So Snowguard removes all the cube equity, all the fun out of these location changing shenanigans. And quite frankly, I think old Snowguard from a cube equity perspective was better. Worse card, better from a cube equity perspective. And I'd like to see Snowguard get some love soon in the buff department.
I think they just need to make the Bear a better card. There's like half Jack. I think Bear should proc whenever Bear plays it, and I think that like you can like trigger Sakar again. You can trigger a lot of things again, and I think if Bear interacted with the location as if it just flipped, it would improve a lot of interactions, right? Or if it just worked on this turn location. So if it worked on like Asgard, if it worked on what else? Like it could trigger a raft maybe again. It could trigger a white hot room again. Like these things, like there's a lot of design space open with Bear. But I think we should move on to like the kinds of locations. And I think you'll notice, right? Every game of Mortal Snap is based around the three locations. It's not just the deck you're playing. Otherwise, kind of every deck would kind of be like, it would be a lot more narrow, right? There's a lot less variance if you're not based on locations. And almost every location has to deal with some sort of resource management, whether it's board or hand management. So we'll kind of talk about the different kinds of locations and how it affects your game plans. Certain types of decks are better in certain locations and certain types of decks aren't. And it should affect how you retreat and how you snap in terms of different games, right? I know Smlz has on the board certain locations, like kinds of locations, but he missed one that I typed out. So I'll go ahead and say it. I'll talk about energy type locations first, which expand the amount of resources you have. You think about the Feast, which was just a hot location. You think about Elysium, you think about White Hot Room, you think about the Superflow. These kind of locations make you forget that turn 6 is like actually where turn 6 is, right? And like you have so much extra energy, you're running out of cards to play, Project Pegasus. And there are certain kind of decks that thrive better in this and certain 10 decks that suffer. So like me playing Sauron, Denish playing Hela, like my curve is a lot lower playing Sauron. So when these locations show up, I'm like, oh dang it, like I have no cards to play. I'm gonna play out all my cards, and then what? Whereas like if I'm facing a V hand and they snap on those locations, I know that like they're generating the resources they need, right? They're gonna Misery, Iron Patriot, get 5 cards in hand, and all of a sudden there's nothing that I can really do about that. And those locations kind of suck for your resource management. So I know a lot of people get excited when they see Elysium, but just be aware, you know, like there are decks that use Elysium better than you can, and you should be aware when you're facing into those kinds of matchups.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think for each of these different types of locations, I want to touch on how Legion affects it, and I think Zen will want to touch on Merlin as well as like Sauron in general, how to play the early game. Because the early game of Sauron is kind of just dumbed down Marvel Snap. It's the same with every other deck. It's just most obvious and clear with Sauron. Regarding these energy type locations with Legion, Legion is usually a ramp card, and so you almost always want to Legion these locations, unless your opponent is playing some like ridiculous Black Panther, Zola, Odin shenanigans, or it's like, okay, well, I'm not beating that. I need to do something else. Yeah, like an Elysium or a White Hot Room, even not a White Hot Room, but an Elysium or a Titan. The other ones, all those Superflow, even being able to Legion these locations as a ramp deck, you can just slam all your power on the board, and that's yeah, with Legion, just Legion it. That's the game plan with the Legion. I will say, a lot of the time you'll want to hold the Legion for a little bit later into the game so that the opponent can't even use all the energy, but you still can. But sometimes your hand is just too big and you have to do it on turn 4. But, I mean, if I Legion Elysium on turn 4 and then snap, they're leaving. Unless they have Mobius, they're leaving. So, yeah. Do we want to touch on Merlin with the specifically with the energy type locations a little?
Yeah, I think if you have any kind of location, generic, you got to think, you got to be. They're trying to hold their power and hide it for turn. Same thing with a tech deck, and you can rogue pull those decks by changing the energy location and dumping your resources earlier than they can, right? And suddenly they look like an idiot because they were trying to hide their game plan, and all of a sudden you scammed them, right? Even holding Mobius till turn 5 against like these decks, if it's like a discount location like Utopia, etc., like it really ends up screwing them, and it's like their perception of how they're spending their resources. It's information asymmetry kind of thing that you can really take to your advantage if you know that that's a possibility.
Miz, do you want to touch on energy locations at all?
I think energy locations are interesting. Based on stuff, I think there was a relatively new one that released, like Reed's Lab. I think that's a very interesting energy design location because we talked a little bit about board management earlier, and I think that's the most board management of the energy locations, even more than the Superflow. It is +1 energy if your location here is full. So a lot of the times I don't find myself getting it if I'm not running like a move card. But if I'm running move cards or cards that move, you can accelerate so much by just getting that +1 max energy for having that location full. So I think there's always, with these energy locations, for the most part, there's some give and get. And then there's Castle Blackstone in the corner, which is just literally snowball the game plan if you're winning here on turn 2, because you get to play a 4-on-3 and a 5-on-4, and it's just ridiculous. The type of location that I think is the most interesting is contest-based. And Castle Blackstone, alongside filling in the energy location spot, it also fills in this contest-based locations. So the contest-based locations are the ones where the like victor or the person that does this first gets an advantage. Think stuff like White Hot Room, think stuff like Asgard. I really like these locations because I think they prioritize the early game in a game that typically prioritizes the late game in Snap. It's the same reason why Iron Patriot was such an interesting card and still is today, because he prioritizes a part of the game that's normally overlooked. Normally in Snap, a lot of decks, specifically mid-range decks, because those are most times the most played, look to build up decent points through the first 5 turns, vomit a bunch of points and attack on 6, and win the game. Basically saying turns 5 and 6 are the most important turns of the game. Iron Patriot flips that. He makes turn 3 extremely important, arguably even more important than turn 5, because it depends if you're getting a -3 discount. Asgard does the same thing. Asgard makes it so that turn 4 is one of the most important turns in the game instead of like turn 5, because you're getting 2 draws. Sometimes it might even be more important than turn 6, because you might have so much draws and your opponent can't convince themselves into a stay when you're absolutely winning because you had those draws. I think contest-based locations change up the game a lot, and I'm eager to hear your thoughts about them.
I feel like
Then
I'm
I'll let you go.
Yeah, I'm a lot better at talking contest-based look past and I'm playing cards out, and usually when you're able to represent more power on these early contest-based locations, it favors your deck. So, like, you're playing Sauron is the easy example I'm going to use, right? Another example that's kind of risen to prominence is these Wiccan Quicksilver decks that are able to contest early and kind of like swing those lanes. Like White Hot Room Wrath, Wiccan's able to generate energy for later while also meaningfully contesting these locations early. I think Sauron and Wiccan are probably the two best examples. When you win Hala, when you win Gamma Lab, when you win Classical Blackstone, Madripoor, etc., these locations that invest in you playing cards, it gives you really high benefit. Actually, towards the late game, like even your island, the +1 location per turn, if you get 2 cards on it early, like your 1/2 becomes essentially a 1/7, right? A 1/8 even, and that's pretty freaking insane for a location that you don't really measure its effect that well. But the other thing that these locations let you do is they let you mind control your opponent, and I think if you're thinking about this and your opponent isn't, you're generally always going to have an advantage over your opponent, right? Like if your deck has Kate Bishop in it and you can play an Acid Arrow, like, you know, that rule of 2 cards and then your opponent starts thinking. If you're thinking ahead of your opponent before they get 2 cards in a lane and you're playing something like Clog, etc., these early contest locations really just like scam you a game. Like you can almost guarantee you win it because they basically let you have Daredevil, right, on turn 1, turn 2. If you know what deck your opponent's playing and where they're going to play their cards, all you have to do is plan accordingly and you'll be able to win the game.
Yeah, and obviously it's a little tricky to know what deck people are playing on turn 1, turn 2. And so a good way to do it is just assume worst case scenario. Like whatever your worst matchup is, that's what your opponent's playing. And so now you're playing around like the worst possible scenario. That's just general advice, not necessarily locations. But yeah, for content-based stuff, I play Legion. Legion doesn't interact with this. The best you can do is turn it off at turn 4. But like Gamma Lab, that's just a bad location for Hela. I can't really do much with it, but outside of Legion, I do think the most significant part of it is definitely, as Zen said, being able to know where your opponent's going to play the cards. Because if it's like, oh, they're going to play 3 cards in Gamma Lab, then suddenly you know, okay, so they're not playing any in Kiln, right? Or their only commitment to Kiln is going to be like maybe a 1-drop and a turn 4. And so a lot of the time you can just throw Gamma Lab and then location trade because now you're winning Kiln. And so now it's a 1-lane game. And that's just something to consider because like there are really bad locations that are contest based. Like there's one that gives energy. The raft card is ridiculous. These are really, really significant effects, even like a Castle Blackstone, where if you let your opponent snowball it, it's going to be a really big deal, especially if you can't turn it off. And yeah, being able to acknowledge that this is a thing that will lose you the game most of the time if you don't address it like immediately. I agree with Smlz. I think these are some of the most interesting types of locations. And yeah, I'll let you cover the end of contest-based stuff if you'd like. Whoever wants to take it.
Yeah, so I think they're personally my favorite just because of how much they shift the game, and I also typically, well, I either play really heavy curves or really light curves in this game. The two decks that I've played most this past year have been Victoria Hand and Hela, so both of them are interesting. I think I really enjoy contest-based locations as well because something else that they do is say I'm a combo deck and I'm popping off. I'm not very good into those contest-based locations, so my opponent might have more ground into me because of that. I think it changes the way matchups work as well. You can't just in a game like this say, oh, Sauron versus Cerebro is 75-25 because 75% of the time you draw your red skull. Obviously not true because they also can't draw Cerebro. You can't say that because of like locations and stuff like that. Maybe the locations are Xandar, Sewer System, and Yggdrasil. And the Cerebro player is just like, I can't do anything. I lose this game. So it's like locations are very interesting. Contest-based locations are even more interesting. And I think locations in general have a very interesting relationship to Snap, where it sort of gives Snap the variance. People talk about Snap like draws give it the variance between games. I think it's locations.
Absolutely. We'll move to restrictive locations. These are my personal favorite because it means I win the game earlier with Legion. These are things like a Cancun, a Sanctum, a Central Park, a Monster Island, even a Danger Room or a Jotunheim, where you are heavily disincentivizing your opponent to play cards in these locations. Xenaid broke it down. We had a private conversation really well. There's three main types of restrictive locations. You're either getting hard restricted, which is you cannot significantly play cards here. These are things like Big House, Kiln, Crimson Cosmos, and even Cancun, because the power there doesn't matter. These are really fun because it means normie decks that run tech cards can't get into them. And so it's either a free lane for you because you're slamming way more power than you should be able to, or it's a free win for you because you can end the game early and with priority. Um, or even if in the case of like a Cancun, they don't know you're going to turn it off. And so you're able to, like, on the last turn, you have 8 power in a lane and you're winning the lane because you Scarlet Witched it or you Merlin spelled it. And they still have to play around that. The next type would be like a token type restrictive location. These are things like the Central Parks and the Monster Islands. What's fun about that is the only card you can really rapidly change locations and re-trigger them are Snowguard and Legion. And Legion is the one that I like because Snowguard is, it got Loki. Loki ruined Snowguard. But yeah, so when you have a game with Central Park for specifically Legion and you're trying to run the scam, you need to make sure A, that you're getting priority, because if you scam yourself, that's not good. And B, you're trying to minimize the amount of lanes you're playing into. This applies to the Monster Island one as well. You basically want to compress all your power into one spot so that you're winning the one lane, and then you're clogging your opponent. And this can apply to any other type of restrictive token type locations they add in the future. Even like the ninjas. Being able to clog your opponent, you're, as we talked about earlier, influencing the board management part of the game. Where, oh, I didn't know they were playing a clog deck, but there's 2 ninjas on the board now where I didn't think there would be. And it capped out one of my lanes, so now they have a free win on a lane. And then there's also soft denial restrictive locations. These are things that the opponent doesn't really want to play into, but they could if they really wanted to, and it wouldn't matter that much. That's like a Luchagia, which adds rocks to your deck when you play into it, or like Danger Room, which is just gambling, or Thunderstruck Tower, or Jotunheim, which like lower the power of the cards you play there. These do the same similar things to the contest-based locations, where you are mind controlling your opponent, but also you can like they're negative effects. And so if you know your opponent is playing less cards than you, turn it off early, you're not going to get benefit out of it. Or if you know your opponent's playing more cards than you and you're running Legion, for example, Legion it. And then there you go. Now your opponent has -1 on every card for the rest of the game, starting on like turn 4. That Legion just played for like 20 something power. Like if you use Heart of the Cards math, that's a 527. That's pretty good.
Pretty good.
Zed, you want to touch upon restrictive?
Yeah, I think restrictive locations, I think where you're, because it affects the priority. Like there's always a reason to not location if that location is not the ruins or like the one that swaps it. So you really want to think about what these locations flipping actually means for your deck and your game plan. So I think like the Sentinel location, right? A lot of people don't want random Sentinels in your hand, but like sometimes the 2/3s fill the curve out really well. Or like if you're talking about Vibranium Mines, like you might have Death's Domain or something, right? And you want to play into Vibranium Mines to get those Vibraniums to make sure you can scam a location. And a lot of people don't really think about that. Luke's Bar example, those are like special locations, but we're talking like these soft denials. Like if you want priority going into turn 6, playing on Lechugia on turn 5 almost always guarantees you priority. Because no one is really actively thinking about that. But I think it's like what separates like the best players from kind of the kind of autopilot, because Snap is really a toilet game, and a lot of people are just autopiloting. And if you are not autopiloting and you're manipulating priority, you're kind of using the opponent's instincts against them, it really does give you a significant advantage, an edge in your matchups.
All right, we'll move on to the buff debuff locations a little bit. We will touch on special cards cases briefly, but regarding special cases, I do think that is a better thing. You almost need hands-on experience for that. We can't explain it. Special cases are things such as your Luke's bars, your Castle Zemos, your Death's Domains, your Newer Dimensions, where they have really, really specific interactions, but we can't go over all of that. And so we will have a new segment on the podcast we'll get to later called Location of the Week, where we're going to start to work through them. But in general, if you want hands-on experience for these locations, I think coaching is the best way to do that. And specifically for locations, I think honestly, me and Zen are the best people you could go to for that. I'll give Smlz a little bit of credit too, but not all of it. Well, I'll say me and Zen. So if you come into the Discord, you got like a 67% chance of having really good coaching for locations. Do we want to say anything for special locations at all before we move on to buff debuff?
Yes.
Let's not go into specifics, but
I would
as a
definitely
concept,
like to touch on special cases after I was so rudely named not an expert on locations, and you'll give me some credit, and then you immediately went to go say, oh, you got a 67% chance of getting someone who knows locations. But special cases are locations that warp the game, in plain sense. My favorite locations in this game are special cases, because they flip the game on its head. They completely ruin what could be a matchup, and you're all of a sudden entering a whole new game where you really got to think on your feet without any like training beforehand. So again, we will begin covering them in our Location of the Week segment, though not this week. But special cases, my biggest advice when you have a special case location, and by this I mean stuff like Death's Domain, Altar of, like sort of stuff like Death's Domain that completely, it's a restrictive location, but it's also a bit of a special case if you're going up against something that likes Destroy. You also have locations like the Peak. You have locations like World Ship, Ego not really, because you just snap on Ego. But these special locations in the game, when you have them, you have to disregard what you're planning for with locations, and you have to work on what you're going to get. I think the best example is World Forge, the one that replaces another location every turn. That is what playing the special cases location game is like. You have to think on your feet. You have to reevaluate your plays because it's a significantly different thing. It's like, oh, I was going to hood Misery. Now Castle Zemo's up. Should I send over the hood even though I have a Misery in hand? You have all these different questions you've got to start asking yourself, and it's going to be a lot of misplays, but if you can successfully guide through it, you can win a lot of cubes through them.
Yeah, and opposed to like popular belief, Denish and I, but we're good at kind of going like step by step. I think we could probably release one-trick guides. So like how Sauron and how Hela interact with different locations. Even how Behan does it with Smlz, we can have him guest segment. But if that's something people are interested in seeing, then it's definitely something we can like look for doing for the Snap Academy YouTube as well, in addition to the 8-Cube Circus podcast. But now that we're through with special locations, like I said, we'll cover these a lot more going into the Location of the Week segments. But let's talk about global locations, because I think for me, I really like these locations being a skill diff check or a deck diff check, right? It's like these locations like inherently look like they affect both players the same way, but like there are decks that will generally use it better. So there's like buff locations like that give you additional power. We'll look at like Shuri's Lab. We'll look at like Nidavellir. We'll look at Mirror Island. We'll look at even decks that like give you additional resources like Cloning Vats or Black Vortex, which turns one of your cards into a 6-drop. Now, these effects look like they can be good for both players, but you really want to use like the information you get from them and how your deck interacts with them to be able to snap or retreat advantageously, right? Like Denish knows, and most people say like Smlz wrongly said when this is like, oh yeah, you know what's a good location? Shuri's Lab, right? So Denish, you want to rip him a new one for that?
Absolutely. So Nidavellir, Sherry's Lab, Mir's Lab are what we call good locations because they make numbers go up, right, Smlz? And then we've got Sokovia and
Okay.
Triskelion that are bad locations.
Triskellion's a good location if you're playing V-Hand, first of all. I love Triskelion, but generally, some are more beneficial than others. But Shuri's Lab does make number go up, and number go up make me happy, so...
Sherry's Lab isn't good for a lot of decks though. Like even a V-Hand or a Hela. Like I don't if I see Sherry's Lab, I'm not snapping. I hate that location. It's not good. And so I think a lot of people wrongly group them into these are good locations, these are bad locations, turn off the bad locations, keep the good ones. Whereas it's kind of different for every deck. Where yeah, there are locations that are good for your deck, but also if you look at the matchup and it's like, okay, Sherry's Lab is usually bad for me, but the opponent's playing Hela, it's worse for them, then yeah, that's good for you. And I don't have too much to say about buff and debuff in general. The way that I see it for these two specific types is you can, if the way that I make the judgment when running Legion is if they're playing more cards than me, I like the debuff locations, I'll Legion like sewers. And if they're playing less, I don't. Like it's really that easy regarding these for Legion. But another thing to consider that I think Zen will touch on a little for these buff and debuff is priority. It is really important to keep priority in mind on these early turns, especially with Cosmo and Juggernaut or not the Negasonic and like these early cards that care about priority a lot. And so being able to recognize I need to throw priority and then play into the sewers, like even a Mirage, for example, that is something to think about. A pretty basic concept, but something to think about.
Yeah, and it's like also the potential power. Look at locations, because you think about playing a solo. There's two kinds of cards. Then you want to play your star brands, and you want to play.
Pause. Well, restart from when you started talking. We're talking just so you can get your train of thought back. I think you're lagging.
You're the one that's lagging.
Let me rejoin the call real quick.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I thought I was lagging. I was like,
Yeah,
okay,
I was
so
like,
it's just
Wait, like, am I good now?
Well, it was on and off.
It's when you start talking for the first 5 seconds. It's like So basically,
Okay,
Soran. That's basically.
And it hasn't been happening every time. It's only happened like twice.
Well, this is why
It's happened more than twice.
The editor.
I've had it
a few
happen about
times.
twice.
It's happened like
Yeah.
4 times, but it's gotten bad lately. So.
Okay, I mean,
Yeah,
we can fix
it
that.
definitely got worse.
I mean,
But,
this is
yeah, we'll
all
see if
like
it fixes
edit,
it.
cut it, and post, whatever.
Yeah, just mark
Yeah,
it down. So,
and
like.
Do you know what you're going on about, Zen?
Oh yeah, I know what I'm going on about.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Then you can
And
start whenever.
also, probably start wrapping it up soon after you cover buff. So after Zen covers buff.
We'll do
I mean, I'll
location
cover
of
this
the week.
whole section.
Oh,
this
we'll
global
do
section.
location. Location of the week takes 2 seconds. Okay. It's Nidavellir.
No,
What is there
No,
to
it'll
say?
take like 5 to 10 minutes.
Captain
Yeah.
Carter.
No, this
It's
is a good amount.
Nidavellir. Shane got changed.
Shut up, Chris. This is why you're you're not the expert.
This is why you're not the location guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nidavellir is a pretty. It has a lot of stuff going for it, but we'll let Zen go.
Yeah. So when we talk about these like buff debuff locations, important thing to talk about in board management is like your potential power output in them. So I'll use Soren as like the base example. You have 2 kinds of cards you want to play: your Soren, your Zeros, your Iron Patriots, and then you have your big cards, right? Your Star Brands, your Typhoid Marys, your Red Skulls. And if you think about like where people are going to play their cards, you shouldn't really play small cards into the debuff location. So like your 1/3 turning into 1/1 in like these -2 locations, it's like a 66% power buff nerf, right? And it limits your potential power output a lot because if you play 4 of those 1/3s into that -2 location, you're getting 4 power. Versus if your opponent plays a 3/10, then that's suddenly a 3/8, and they're not losing as much percentage value, right? So if your deck struggles for power input, you really don't want to be playing into these debuff locations. And the same goes vice versa for buff locations, right? You can generate early priority just by having more cards in a location that gives you additional power. So like if you're playing into a Hela or these decks that don't play a lot of cards, these act like a pseudo Mojo World, right? Like you can play 3 cards into Shuri's Lab. If your opponent only plays 1, then it doesn't matter how small your cards were, you're going to get way more benefit than your opponent, unless their card is like a Red Skull or something. So these are kind of like symmetrical locations. And then we look at like finally the last ones when we talk about an informational symmetry basis is like Daily Bugle, White Palace, the Peaked. Ones that give your opponents information about what you have in your hand, like similarly to a Mirage Effect, etc. And I think with these, it's just a skill diff, a skill check. Like, are you aware of your opponent having your card? Can you kind of read what card they have? And can you use their cards against their deck better than you can against yours? And all of this information isn't necessarily just talking about like how you want to play the game, but also how you want to snap and retreat as aggressively or as passively as you would like, right?
I'll touch a little bit on information locations because there's only like 2 of them in the game because I think Peak is a little bit different. Yeah, it's just skill diff. You see the card, you can use it against them. I played against somebody today when I was being cringe and playing Move, and they gave me a beast on a Shuri's Lab game, and I won 8 cubes. Pretty circus that game was. Daily Bugle's just another like think on your feet location. White Palace is just, oh, that's cool, they're running Agatha, I'm gonna retreat for 1, that kind of location. So I don't know. I don't think they're that interesting compared to the other types of locations, particularly contest-based and special cases. It's just like, yeah, you get a card. Woo. I'm a better player. I'll probably use this card 5% better, but it matters in like 1 out of every 3 games. So maybe I'm flipping 1 out of 6 games with a location like this. I don't find them to be too impactful.
Absolutely. I do agree that these buff, debuff, and information locations are less significant generally. But even with like a White Palace, if you're running a Legion, like, oh look, it's a Scar. Now I have 3 Scars and they all cost 3 because I played like, or even 5. Like, you don't necessarily want that even, to be honest. Just to keep it in mind, especially with Peak, which once again is a little different. But what I'm trying to say is basically a lot of people forget that you are actually getting information from it and they just use the card. And so it is important to keep in mind on like a White Palace, you're getting information about the draw. Or like with Daily Bugle, you're getting information about the draw. If you have their Cerebro, that means they have their Cerebro, unless it gets peaked to you. But we will move on now to our location of the week. This is a new segment we are going to start doing every week. We're going to touch up on a specific special condition location that is a little bit more in-depth concept-wise. Or it doesn't even have to be special condition. A lot of the time it'll just be something like this where it's Nidavellir. Nidavellir might seem pretty basic, but it's actually got quite a few implications on it. The first one I want to touch on is with early priority as well as late priority. Nidavellir +5 is such a ridiculous number that the person who's winning it for a majority of the game will be the person who has more cards in it. And so it flips the priority game on its head away from, I want priority, I need to play more power, to, I want priority, I need to play more cards. Zen, do you want to touch on the priority aspect of Nidavellir?
Yeah, I think if you run location change, the priority aspect also changes a lot because you can rug pull this location just like you would rug pull a Mojo Worlds. Like you have a 3/10 in the location and they have like 3/1/3s or whatever. I think another cool priority thing with the location is like Juggernaut and Negasonic win Nidavellir just the same way you would win Mojo World with Juggernaut Negasonic. Even Electra puts in a lot of work on this location. Shang-Chi used to auto win it, but I'm pretty sure Shang-Chi will still auto win it now because it's not a insta win, but you're still flipping the location for minus of 10 power card minus like the 5 plus your 8. So it's like an 18 power swing, right? So I think like there's certain interactions like for Luna, you don't even want to get rid of your Ice Cube a lot of time on this location. Or like people also count power really badly at Nidavellir, I've noticed. Like, I'll just have my Star Brand be a 310, and people will like think that they can win with 4 cards. And I'm like, you can't win with 4 cards, because even though I'm playing less cards, my cards are big, like really big. And your cards are 1/3s and 2/4s. So I think like this location gives a lot of like what kind of cards you should be playing in it, and when should you playing those types of card, right? Because then I think the Shang-Chi argument is a lot like you don't just auto lose this location to Shang-Chi. There's a lot more interaction. I think like the Shang-Chi nerf, like this location, Gamma Lab, etc. Like it makes these locations a lot more interesting.
There's 2 cards for this location. Shang-Chi, not even the best card on Nidavellir, even pre-nerf. It's Captain Carter. Captain Carter on this location is the goofiest thing ever. Captain Carter is ongoing, and the buffs that you give Captain Carter, even location buffs, still apply to the cards in the back. So Captain Carter is effectively giving you an extra 2 board slots on this location. Yay. This location, I think, is very dependent on cards in deck. Obviously, there's stuff that you can location change and it doesn't matter. That's like every location in the game for the most part, unless like token locations. But Nidavellir, I think, is pretty favorable to 1, Captain Carter decks, 2, ongoing decks, cards like Iron Man, and 3, Swarm decks, like decks like Bounce that typically play 4 cards in a lane. It's a good contest lane for you. I think the priority dynamics are the most interesting part of this location, but I think this is a location where you have cards in your deck. This is a location that makes it more easy for you to snap in games where you're like running a Captain Carter or you're running Bounce. It's easier to snap because you know you have such a big advantage in one of the 3 lanes.
Yeah, I think Carter is a pretty cool card with the location. Less so, I mean, than Juggernaut, for example. But what I want to touch on more before we rip into the Carter as the best Nidavellir card statement is Zen touched on rug pulling. I think with Legion especially, but also even like a Scarlet Witch, being able to rug pull, because you can basically cut 10 to 15 power from their lane if you only have a big card and a Scarlet Witch, or even just a big card. Like if Zen starts running Legion in his deck, he can Red Skull on the right with no ability, and then just turn off Nidavellir, and that swings 15 power in the Nidavellir lane because he Legioned in another lane. And let's say you even Legion in like -1 into this location, then that is like you're swinging even more now. But Smlz just mentioned that Jug does that for every location. You're right, but I think it does it more significantly for Nidavellir, because instead of a 4/5, it's a 4/10 or 4/15, depending on how many cards you're pushing, because you're just denying them the power. And so it's a lot easier because you have the entire extra board slot than they do.
All right,
Yeah,
I want to quickly butt in here. Juggernaut is a 4/10 if you play him on any other location. Juggernaut is literally a widow location button. It's not just Nidavellir. This is why I'm if you want to say Iron Man, I can agree with Iron Man being the best card on this location. But if we're going into the Juggernaut argument, Juggernaut's the best card on like 20 different locations. He's the best card on Ruins because he moves the cards out of the location, so he's really good at winning Ruins. Who would have thought?
Hey,
Well, yeah.
You know what? I see your Captain Carter and I see your Iron Man, and I raise you a Super Scroll. I think Super Scroll is therefore the best card on Nidavellir because it beats your 2 cards. So guess what? But I think
you win.
Oh wait, Denish go, but then I have a more serious note.
Oh, I'll let you go. You can. Let's hear it, Zen.
Yeah, I think the more impactful location, the more swingy it can be when you do run location control. So Denish, the Legion merchant, keeps talking about it when I talk about Merlin in this location. It's just if you see like this kind of location show up, that's very high impact on your game. It just gives you more reason to be like, I should be running location control, because the amount of cubes you gain from turning off a Nidavellir is very significant. Like it's not a 1 cuber, it's not a 2 cuber. You're going to win 4 and 8, and your opponent's probably not going to expect it. Like that's why the Scarlet Witch has such a high value, because it's a low investment. It's 2 energy, and you could just shut off a location. So like and it's a 2-3, right? So you can also tempo it out, etc. But yeah, you start seeing like really high value plays when you start thinking about how you can interact with these locations on a higher basis. I know we've talked about a lot of synergistic cards. I'll talk about Hood. Hood turn 1 actually can get you prio on this location. Same thing with like Quantum Realm, and I think it's pretty tough, like when you can play Hood and also get priority, you're basically negating the downside of Hood, right? And it's pretty cool to be able to do that.
Absolutely, and we will continue to do this with every location in the game. I'm guessing, are you guys dried up with Nidavellir? Anything else you want to say
Not
before we
much
start
more
to
I
wrap?
want to say other than if you have a location that you want to talk about, make sure to leave it in the comments below, leave a like on the video, and subscribe to Snap Academy for more 8-Cube Circus and other content. That's going to about wrap it up for us this episode. So if you want to follow us on the socials, we have... Let me quickly... This could be cut because I got to shift OBS stuff. If you want to follow us on the socials, you can find Denish at twitch.tv/Denish_hell. You can find me at youtube.com/@SnapAcademyYT. And you can find xenaid at twitch.tv/XenaidTFT. He's a TFT player, not a Snap player. And if you want stream and notification alerts for all those channels, if you want to talk with us more, you want some coaching, you want to suggest stuff for the podcast, you want to ask questions if we do mailbag episodes in the future where we take your questions and we answer them on the podcast, we have a Discord now. Link is in the description. Make sure to join up, and we have a little onboarding thing where you can press the alerts that you want. I hope you all had a great time listening to this episode, and stay tuned next week for a very golden episode.